Hello, thank you for joining me. My name is Donavan from Salt of the Streets, and this is the review preview for, don't worry about the months, this is about the books. So the books that we're doing this time around are By the People, which was the May book, I'm pretty certain, and the August book, I know that one for sure, is going to be The Revolutionary Samuel Adams. So the reason we're doing it this way, and I addressed this in episode 152 a little bit, is because the June and July book was D-Day. I don't have a whole lot of fresh takes on D-Day. Of course, the stories are incredible, but that would be mostly what the review preview is just kind of me retelling and rereading some of these stories, which is fun, but I like to review the book, to give an actual take on it, and this book was excellent, but I just don't feel like I can do anything new to the review portion of it. So
It'd be like a good old history podcast.
precisely. So I decided that I would finally address this book, because the reason I didn't originally do a review preview on this is because I had a lot to say about it, and I was very uncertain how I wanted to handle it. I thought a lot about maybe writing something, or I just wasn't sure. So when this came around, I decided I was going to do a review preview, but a more discussion style. So I have a ton of stuff written that I'm going to go over, but obviously there's a lot of discussion to be had here. So that, and then we will preview The Revolutionary Samuel Adams. We'll get into that one a little bit later. So overall, I thought that this book by the people, Charles Murray, was really good. Generally speaking, I think that books like this, and I'll explain that in a second, deserve to be read. And what I mean is books specifically that are critical of the government in a very constructed and well-researched way. Anybody can write a manifesto and publish it on the internet. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm sure there are some of those that are worth reading, but it's very relevant, I think, and important for people to seek out books like this, like I said, that are well researched and have a lot of citations and make sense. There are coherent arguments and critiques of the way the government is, explains to you how it got there, and also presents a pathway forward. Not just complaining, but a potential pathway forward. And we'll get into, I have this constructed in kind of three parts, and that's how this book is set up as well. Maybe four, but three kind of main parts of the argument. And so that is kind of how we will go over it. So I think the first section of the book is really good. It does a great job detailing, like I was saying earlier, how we got here, going through from the founding, the kind of different legislative processes that got us here, the abdication of various responsibilities on all parts of the government, the judicial branch, legislative and executive, how all of those branches have abdicated their responsibilities and gotten us to this point. And I thought that it was very good. I don't have really any critiques of the first section. Like I said, it's very well researched, and also well cited. There's a ton. He cites a ton of books that you can read, not just papers and things that are in there, but also books that you can find that he has used to construct the argument. So if you want a deeper understanding of how he got here, he provides it for you, which I think is great. One of the biggest issues that we go over on the show is people not citing their sources, journalists specifically, telling a whole story or saying, well, I heard this or this has been reported, and not citing anywhere or giving any type of citation or link to the article to where they read this thing. Just, this is what I heard, and now this is what I'm going to put out on the internet. So that I have a huge issue with. So I like that he did that. He goes over the softening of the court, the weakening of the congressional body, and the submission to sclerosis and near complete takeover of the executive branch by the administrative bodies that it created. So sclerosis is a term that he used here that I had never heard before, but it has to do with the degradation of the government, specifically due to the money, outside money that begins to flow into it, right? It becomes a victim to this process, and it is then unsavable. Right. So he speaks a lot to the sclerotic nature of the government and the different bodies that exist in it. So that is what that term means. Thought it was really good. Right. I think especially well placed in something like this. So there is no doubt. We'll talk about the Supreme Court first. Right. So there's no doubt that this perceived legitimacy, and we've discussed that concept many times before, of the Supreme Court is at an apparently all-time low, because they're doing polls and stuff all the time about how much people respect the Supreme Court and how much they believe in it and stuff like that. And I think that people's eyes are being opened to the lunacy, in my opinion, of allowing 9 clearly biased people to make decisions that control the entirety of the nation. And I don't know that they're realizing that's what it is. I just know that they're questioning the court. They're questioning why we're allowing decisions like this to be handed down. Why are we listening to this? And so I think the core of it is really good. I think it'll still take a lot of fleshing out for people to get to that point of not just why are we listening to this, but why are we allowing 9 people who we can't trust anybody to be inherently unbiased. That's something we've talked about many, many, many times on the show. And the way that we have begun to view the Supreme Court as a nation is through a clearly biased lens. It's either a conservative court or a liberal court. And even down to the people who are putting them in those chairs, the questions they're asking them, are you going to rule on this? Do you believe this? Those people don't believe they can be unbiased. It is from the very beginning. We have accepted from the beginning of the process that this court is biased. We know that now. There isn't even a question or an air of unbiased nature that surrounds it. So the very congressional body that is putting these people in place, the Supreme Court nominees, is also working actively to politicize every single nominee on the court at the time that the nomination is going on. And that very process that they're undertaking is making it virtually impossible for any citizen in the United States to believe that they're truly objective. So any decision they hand down, any opinion they hand down is already tainted. We can't respect their opinion at the core of what it should be at the founding because of the way that they are presented to us before they're even put on the court. And it also makes it clear to us that the Congress, every individual member, doesn't expect them to be unbiased either. They already expect them to go in. So there isn't anybody other than maybe the nominee who's going in that's expecting that they're going to be unbiased at their job. We've accepted it now. So I struggle when it comes to this body of the idea of preservation because it is so far past what it was originally defined to that we have already accepted its bias, its biased nature. How could we possibly move forward or change it in a way that will re-embody what it is supposed to be, that it is? I hate to keep using the word biased, unbiased, but that's like what the core of it is, an unbiased reading of the Constitution to give people the truest sense of it so we can move forward with that and not anybody's political interpretation. But that's precisely how we read it now, is that everybody is politicized. They're all looking at it through a political lens. So I struggle with any way of saving that when we've already accepted that it has gone against its original inception.
That's a good. That is. Seems to me like that is about the corest of the core that you can find within the issue of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
You get down to literally the bottom of the barrel because the court itself is designed as a body. It's ineffable. You know, it's like it's just this thing that exists, right? Because that's the structure of government, right? That's just the way it is. But at the end of the day, you do have to put human beings in those positions. And when you're talking about something like the courts and the rule of law, or, you know, because at its very core, the law goes all the way back to the Constitution. All laws are based off the Constitution. And the Supreme Court's job is to decide whether or not this is or is not constitutional.
Fits in the framework, right?
But there's an inherent flaw from the jump because the human beings that will occupy those offices to make those calls have the doomed nature of being human.
Right. And we've seen that almost since the beginning, right? Yeah. And another point that Charles Murray makes about the Supreme Court is that oftentimes the way that they make large nation-changing decisions is not just based off of whether or not it can be read as constitutional, but also whether or not it can be accepted by the country at that time, right? Mm-hmm. So part of the reason that the civil rights movement and Brown versus the Board of Education was ruled the way that it was because the Supreme Court believed, this is Charles Murray's reading, the Supreme Court believed we had come far enough in our progression as a nation that we were prepared to begin to make this turn towards civil rights. right? Even though it was crazy, it was chaotic, it was insanity, we were ready for it. The nation wanted that. And so we needed to find that. We needed to rule it this way. And it was a correction of something that we knew was improper in separate but equal and fucking, you know what I'm talking about, Dred Scott case, right?
Yep.
These things were overturned because we knew they were wrong, but at the time it was fine. That to me underlines that issue, that they're not reading it the way they're supposed to. They're not doing their job. They're letting the nation and what they think we will accept guide them, which is not right. It's not what we think is okay. It is what the Constitution says, how the nation has been designed. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. This is what the fucking rules are.
Yes.
This is how the game is played, even if you don't like it. That's the whole idea. So I struggle with this. If we're accepting all of these flaws in it, then what's the fucking point?
And there would be no way to interpret whether or not that is truly the way it's supposed to work, because there's no literature, spelling that out anywhere.
Right.
Because all we have are select writings. These people are long dead at this point, and they spoke very, very differently than we do now. And so that could have been. I mean, there's a lot of writings when they talk about like the damned nature of humanity, that there are no angels, there's a lot of like the true realization that all humans can be bad if they so choose to be. And so they might have had some kind of idea that at the end of the day, we have the structure is there, but when the people are in, they are going to be people of their time, which will reflect overall a society's interpretation of the words that we write.
Okay.
That's just something I just thought about just now. But that,
depending on how long they expected us
these
to
people
still be working on this framework.
and they're there for an entire generation most of the time.
Right.
Because it's a lifelong job. And so that could have something to do with it. Might be reading into it, but essentially when you actually get down to the point, like you were just talking about, the structure, if you needed a completely unbiased body to make calls, then it's flawed from the get up, and this was doomed to failure from its creation. It was illogically designed to serve that purpose.
Certainly in modern application.
Yeah, for sure. It might have been simpler back then, because all those dudes were around for the jump. They were all there for the startup. They started. America was a startup company,
right?
And the founders were there at the startup, and then they all died and wasted away.
They're long gone now. Yeah. So let's talk about the Congress for a second, right? The Congress abdicates its responsibility on a daily basis and sees no problem with the open corruption that has taken over the Capitol since essentially day one, but particularly since the onset of lobbyists and rulings like Citizens United, right? The legislative branch has proven its ineffectiveness time and time again, and they're unable to even consider the idea of a balanced budget, especially in modern day, yet continue to spend and get reelected. We talked about that earlier in the episode, this 20 whatever percent approval rating and the 90+%, receipt rating. They have no intent or motivation to help anybody who isn't giving them large sums of money, right? So I think I have a couple readings here. Okay, and this is a small reading from page 92 that talks about it's under the heading of "In a corrupt system, you pay for access to the authorities." So let's see, usually this has been an informal, though universally observed understanding. After he became Republican whip in 1995, Tom DeLay brought it nakedly into the open. He prepared, quote, the book, a compilation of all of the contributions by the 400 largest PACs made to both Democratic and Republican members over the previous 2 years. They were used to establish ratings of friendly or unfriendly for every company, industry, or association that was likely to be a client of the major lobbying firms. The book was laid on a folder in the anteroom to DeLay's office in the Capitol building, where any visitor was welcome to leaf through it. Friendlies could get meetings with DeLay. Unfriendlies could not. You could easily switch your classification. No protestations of ideological solidarity were necessary. Just contribute enough money and you became a friendly. Okay, so again, it's not just that the book was there, it was open for any lobbyist to stop by. And if we think that this type of thing doesn't happen now, you're being ignorant, right? It maybe doesn't sit outside of the office of the people who head the lobbying or the contributions for the PACs and the different parties. The books absolutely exist. The lists are 100% there. But this was 1995. You could be a little more closeted then. The internet was just kind of in its infancy, You can't do that now. With smartphones everywhere, you couldn't exactly have the book outside of your office for everyone to take a picture of it at any given time.
Yeah.
Right? You know what list you're on because when you call, they either respond or they don't. That's how you know. And if they don't answer, you give more money. Eventually they answer. We've heard many people talk about this. This is the open corruption of Congress. They have no problem with it. They're happy to do it.
Yeah. Tradition is a hard thing to break.
Yeah, precisely.
And that's, I mean, you see it all the time with newer, upper-coming people that are getting into office that haven't been there before, and then it's kind of like you just hit your stopwatch and see how long it takes for them to become corrupted. I mean, we've seen this with Dan Crenshaw, Patch McCain. We've saw it with, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is a prime example. I mean, they're everywhere. Every time an outsider jumps in there, I mean, Donald Trump even to a point, he's not the same person coming out of that than he was going in.
No.
He's been through the system. There's levels of corruption that they just come with the territory. And that is the way things appear to have gone for so long that it is just how it works at this point.
Yes. So let's talk about the executive. The executive branch, in my opinion, was a joke from the beginning, but has now become a body so rotten with corruption and subterfuge that it can be considered nothing but a zombie of the man that Lincoln supposedly feared for it to be. In the wake of legislative failures, the executive branch embodied what it always hoped to be and began an expansion that continues today. Dozens of administrative bodies with thousands of employees, all with more benefits and higher salaries than you, all with the goal of finding ways to fine or imprison you for breaking rules that were never passed into law, right? And this is where my biggest issue begins with the book itself. But first I have this reading that we'll go over, and then we're going to move into part 2, right? And I talked to you a lot about part 2 when I was reading this. Okay, so this reading speaks to the size of the government, right? And the growth specifically. And this is on page 88. In 1930, the average size of the staff of a member of the House was 2.0, meaning that the average House member had a secretary and one aide for everything else. The average number of staff for senators was 2.9. Per force, the members did most of the substantive work themselves. By 1957, those numbers had expanded to 5.6 staff members in the House and 11.6 in the Senate. By 1967, that's just 10 years later, to 9.2 in the House and 17.5 in the Senate. But even at this point, according to Jerry Cassidy, a prominent lobbyist who got into the business in those years, quote, "The Senate was a very different place then. Small staffs, members did so much of the work themselves, they were on the floor a lot, and members knew they were talking about. They had a lot of time, they were very familiar with the issues." Just 10 years later, in 1977, the average House member had an office staff of 16 people, and the average senator had a staff of 36. The number of issues that members had to vote on had increased. The number of regulatory issues the PACs were bringing to members had mushroomed. Meanwhile, the time representatives and senators could devote to these issues had been slashed, in part because they were now forced to spend so much time fundraising. In its briefing for newly elected House members after the election of 2012, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee presented, quote, "a model daily schedule for members for when they were in D.C. It included 4 hours of call time, the term for phoning contributors, 1 hour of strategic outreach, which includes such things as breakfast and meet and greets with supporters. When they're not in Washington, the model daily schedule calls for 3 hours of daily call time plus 1 hour of strategic outreach." So all the time, the staff has been growing this much, right? The lobbyists have been increasing. They're spending less and less time actually doing their job, continuing to abdicate responsibility, just like I was talking about. All right, now I want to talk about part 2. Part 2 is when Murray lays out his idea and concept for civil disobedience, right? So his civil disobedience thing has to do with the insane amount of laws that are on the books, right? And, any law that is unjust, it's like our duty to, the whole quote about now it's your job, you got to not follow it and all the things, right? That's what this whole chapter is about. So I have a small reading that will just kind of go over what his criteria is for civil disobedience, and then I'm going to go over his stuff and then kind of lay out my more direct issues with it, right? So his criteria for laws that should be civilly disobeyed. Okay. All right, so these are the practical ground rules, right? Avoid choosing regulations with halo effects. Choose regulations in which people who might be harmed by violating the regulation are willing parties. Choose regulations in which the spirit of the regulation is being obeyed even though the letter is being violated. And above all else, the principled and practical ground rules are all subordinate to this overriding consideration. Systematic civil disobedience cannot succeed if it is used on behalf of people who are trying to game the system. It is essential above all else that my proposed measures for supporting civil disobedience be used for defendants who have acted in good faith. Defendants who are technically guilty must be ethically innocent. Right? So that's the deal. That's like the biggest thing, the thing that this all hangs on, is that no one is actually harmed by you not following this law. And it's only, it's just a technicality. That's all that is. It's just a rule that they made up that has actually no moral bounds. That's the basis for all this stuff. Right? So
this is like this is why nobody really sides with the eco activists that go out there and sit in front of traffic and block roads, because you are literally hurting people's ability to go about their daily lives. Nobody cares about what you're doing.
So he came up with a really big example, and then I'll go over some of the stuff that I have written. And the example that he gave was a concrete factory, and it was that an OSHA regulator, inspector, comes to this factory and finds all of multiple OSHA infractions that this factory has violated. One of them is that they have a railing that's 3 inches too short. Another one is that they have some sand in a shed that is not properly marked as a biohazard, because technically sand is a carcinogen under level 3 whatever, because you can get into your lungs and all the whatever. So it needs to have a special sticker on this building, right? Another one is that a guy is near a power sander or something and has a face mask on, but he has a beard, so it's not perfectly fit to his face. And another one is that the safety belt doesn't have an emergency shutoff switch, but it's separated from anywhere that employees could get to, so they just didn't install it, right? So that's the situation that he comes up with, and it's like, this is the perfect scenario for what I'm talking about, because none of these things harm anybody, and they're all kind of bullshit regulations anyway, and it's all just finding someone a job, right? Yep. That's great. It's totally right. Yeah. And so he's saying...
then you got angry.
I got super pissed because I read the whole thing and I became very, very upset at the end. So I'm going to read some of this and then I'll make my bigger point at the end because I get mad upset. So I think that's good. I think all of that sounds excellent. And it outlines what we talked about earlier, right? Me not fucking registering my truck. No one is harmed by this. I'm not doing it because fuck the state. I'm not going to keep giving you money. This is just a technical issue. There's no ethical issue here with me not being coerced by you into giving you more of my money when you steal it out of my paycheck every fucking week anyway, right? This, to me, fits this parameter exactly, except he's like, oh, tax laws and all this bullshit. Fuck you. That doesn't wash for me. This argument that tax laws need to be exempt from this is total dog shit. I'm not into it at all. When part of the country's founding is based off of repressive taxing, if I've been repressively taxed, I'm going to find every way to not pay those taxes. That's my job. That fits this, what you're talking about of these unjust laws. It's now my duty to rebel against them. I'm not fucking doing this. I own the vehicle. I'm paying a different body for it. I have insurance on it. I'm being responsible. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to keep fucking paying you for a sticker on my license plate. This is ridiculous. So to me, that type of stuff fits exactly, even though it undercuts his tax law thing. I think that's total dog shit. So couldn't agree more with the idea of civil disobedience, even largely with the definition used to decide what rules and laws to disobey. And I even think the idea of civil defense funds is good, because he lays out this whole idea that there should be privately funded civil defense funds, which are lawyers who are willing to represent people just like this concrete plant who have come across this issue and they're just being trampled on by the administrative state. That's all this really is. And so the civil defense funds are going to pay for not only the whole defense, but if they lose and there is a penalty, then they're also going to pay this fee. And so it's kind of a double fuck you to the state, because they know that not only is the government going to have to keep shelling out money every day they want to drag this case out, that the business owner is not, but also if they do get a fine, the business owner isn't paying it. These private lenders are, or these, not lenders because it's all free, but the contributors, whatever, right? I think that's a great idea. I think that's excellent. I think that it's a beautiful vision. Right. I think that in practical application, there's a couple of things in this that I think are just lost in the time. This book, I think, was written in 2013. And I think in 2015 was a really genius thing. And I think there was a lot of potential in that. But over the last couple of years, not even the full extent, but an idea. We got an idea of the extent that the state is willing to go to maintain control. And I don't know how long they would allow the Civil Defense Fund to continue to operate that way without finding some loophole to force them to shut down, or bankrupting them, or, I mean,
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Their fund, the state's fund, is unlimited.
yes.
And so they can literally just siege tactic style wait for any legal defense fund to run out.
And that's another thing that's lost in here. He's still working with a deficit of like $3 trillion and talking about how crazy this is. You know, our deficit's $20+ trillion. So that idea that I think he's still operating in, that they can't afford to keep spending forever. They absolutely can, and they absolutely will. They will find ways to squirrel it away. All that defense money, that's where this goes. All this shit that they're paying for, it just disappears into the administrative body. They're like, oh, we miscalculated all these hours, so we actually saved a shitload of money, and it's all fine. It's all ones and zeros. None of it matters anymore. So I think those two things are big time loss just on the time, and I can't really blame him for that. Just it's 10 years ago. So I get it, but that's part of why I was talking about how important it is to read this type of shit, because a lot of the ideas in here are very good, and it'll give you a fresh perspective if you're doing the type of thinking and discussing that we are, trying to find pathways forward. This is just more ideas. It's all just more ideas that keep adding and refresh your thought process, that make the revolution that much better and that much more successful. So the more reading you do this type of book, the better, I think.
It's an intellectual revolution. That's really what we're talking about. You're literally changing hearts and minds enough to... It's the only thing that can overthrow the bureaucratic state, honestly.
Yes.
No amount of force will dislodge it.
So this was saying, I think this take and the success of the defense funds ignores the truly violent nature of government intent on maintaining power. I truly believe the measures of societal control we saw during COVID are a shadow of what the government is willing and prepared to do if the riots that we saw were more deeply violent or focused and effective. If we didn't see... We saw craziness. We saw chaos is a better encapsulation of what we saw during COVID and George Floyd and Jan 6. It was chaos.
Yep.
None of that had an intent on doing anything other than causing chaos and maybe trying to push a message of anger forward. But there was not a focused plan for any of those riots. And I think if there was that, we would have seen a much stricter crackdown and a greater show of force and capability from the government. And that's kind of what I'm speaking to. And I think that's what these defense funds, the idea that ignores is just what the government is really willing to go to, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, you read the White Pill from Michael Malice, and you know his whole point in that book is that like you don't know how much worse it could be.
Right.
Like that's the White Pill, is it could go bad. During COVID, it was chaotic, it was wild, the level of authoritarianism was wild. But like we didn't actually get the gulags that could have come. Like we didn't actually get there. We definitely took some steps closer, but we didn't actually get there.
Can get a lot worse.
Yes.
And we saw that. I'll talk about it a little bit, but when we talk about it all the time, you know, just to the north, it was worse to the north. It was worse in Australia. It was really, really bad in China. You know, we saw the degree of how far it can go when that control gets even further out of hand.
It got super dark.
With that in mind, right, this is where my big beef comes in, and I don't think any fan of the show will be necessarily surprised, right? With that in mind, I am legitimately shocked at the complete refusal to mention the growing threat that bodies like the ATF and other rogue intelligence communities and law enforcement agencies stand for us when they're continuously infringing on constitutionally protected rights of American citizens on a near daily basis. That's what this whole book is based in, is the Constitution. And the Constitution, this going back to the founding and the ideas and Madisonians and all this shit. Okay, all right. Number 2 on the list is guns, you fuck. So when the state is doing this, when this is the plan, when they're continuously trying to disarm people, how do you literally not mention it one time? Not a single time. When again, all of your parameters are making sure that you're following the tax laws, you're making sure that nobody gets hurt, you're doing it with intent, it's not ethical, it's technical. Okay, if I purchase a firearm, right, Fuck the tax part of it. If I purchase a firearm and I have it for myself, no. If it's legal in my state, but it happens to break where I configured in a way, if I pay a tax for everything, I buy it all at the store, and then I configure it in a way that breaks the ATF's codes, that is effectively a federal law. No one is talking that I don't ever use it for anything other than personal defense if I need it, and shooting on the range. Right? I'm prepared citizen. I'm part of the militia. I'm ready to use it to defend myself and the nation if I need to. At what stage of this is anybody harmed by that?
None whatsoever.
At what stage of this does this violate anything other than a technicality of the law? What better example, other than the hypothetical creation of a concrete factory, could we find to fit as a category of civil disobedience than a firearms law that is not a law? It is a rule handed down by an arbitrarily decided and selected body, administration of the executive state. The same thing that he claims has grown to the point that it's ridiculous. The executive can't do its job. It can't be limited. It can't do anything because the administrative bodies just do their own thing. When they have done just that and made it so that people like myself, everybody that I hang out with, that I go to the range with, are all federal criminals because of the way that we have configured a firearm, what better example is there?
Yeah, kind of missed the elephant in the room on that one, didn't he?
So if this man is truly a libertarian, which I have every reason to believe that he is, right? He must see the vital role that firearms have in the maintenance and protection of the vital human and American rights. He has to. That's part of the idea, libertarian, right? What better example is there that fits Murray's criteria for the civil disobedience, the safe ownership of and training with arms that are meant to repel threats, foreign and domestic? Right? It's obvious in the book alone. It's obvious by this book alone that Murray is not stupid. He's very, very intelligent. So I have to attribute the lack of mention to the perceived, either a perceived lack of threat of the rogue agencies that I've just mentioned, right? I mean, that's the only thing I can think. There's no other way to ignore this. You have to just not think that they're a threat, but that seems so fucking ignorant to history, all historical context, to personal defense and maintenance of freedoms, to not consider that these firearms agencies might infringe on rights. I can't conceive of a reason why he would do it.
Yeah. My best guess when it comes to something like this is it kind of, and it almost makes him hypocritical, obviously, but because this was 2013, right?
2015.
2015. You know, things aren't that different.
We're in Obama.
Realm. So shit's tight, and it's been tight for the debate has been raging constantly. And at that time too, the new rise of kind of the more independent civil disobedience within the Second Amendment started, I think, about then anyways.
This is post Sandy Hook.
Yes.
Like this, the AR shit has already popped off.
Yes.
All those discussions are already happening.
We've already gone through an assault weapons ban at one point in the 90s. So my best guess at this point is it's probably the libertarians' strength, but also its biggest weakness is that everybody's biased. Some people are afraid of guns. Some people don't like guns. Some people think that guns are very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
And I would assume that if he would probably, if you had him like in a conversation and was explained to him, he probably could not disagree with you. But I would imagine some people just don't want to fight that much.
Right.
And they'll find another way to make a point.
I almost want to write just
I need an answer.
like 40 pages of just like, this is an appendix to this book because it's a gravely needed portion of it that was somehow looked over, and I don't want to attribute malice to him, but what the fucking fuck? Like in what world could you ignore this? For real? It's insanity. So
that's why I kind of have to just fall back on that. It's probably just personal bias.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not going to be passionate enough to talk about this in the right way.
That was my biggest beef with the whole book, was that particular thing there. Is that I was like, I'm jazzed. I'm ready to hear this case. Let's hear a technical argument of why fuck the ATF. Not one mention.
Bro.
The acronym never showed up. I was very upset.
We've gone through, Ruby Ridge and
yes,
all that stuff has already occurred.
Yes.
The things have happened.
Waco. I mean, children and women have already been murdered.
Yes.
Yeah,
that seems
disturbed by it.
Yeah, that's rough. Yeah. And I can get somebody again, I can understand why he wouldn't want to if that wasn't his thing, but for fuck's sakes, man, if you're going to make those points, it kind of becomes obvious. Like I said before, it's the elephant in the room. Why
Yeah.
are you not discussing that? What's going on here?
Yes. So in the final part of this, I'm going to address kind of the last portion of the book, in which it's like a hopeful look forward, right? So he's talking about, I think part of the pathway forward is, to roll back these administrative states. Like, this is not good that we have this. And another pathway forward is these defense funds. Like, this is really good. And so these are things that we should be doing on pathway forward, right? So all I can call it is concern, because I have no way to prove whether he's right or wrong, but I fear, from where I'm standing now in 2023, that this outlook on the preservation of the government as it is now, still through the vision of the original vision of the Constitution, I think is too hopeful. I don't know, and I could be totally wrong. I just don't know that we're going to be able to roll back those bodies and get them to where they were before without a mass overhaul of what you were talking about earlier, of like an intellectual whatever the fuck you said. It was great.
Intellectual revolution.
Thank you. So without that, without more people embracing this, which I think is coming, but without a mass embracement of personal freedom and liberties and repulsion of the growing government,
Tyranny.
I just don't. There are so many people that ask for more of it.
I will say this, that is also a white pill moment for that argument, is that never before has there been a tool available that would allow the everyday citizen to be able to reach anybody at any time, to perhaps
Right.
have them join us in the intellectual revolution, to really change the hearts and minds. Never before has a tool existed until now. And we have the tool, and people are using it, which is why the cause is growing. So that's a white pill moment.
Yeah.
But I do want to address the concept of this rollback situation. We need to roll back this. We need to roll back that.
Yeah.
I'm so fucking tired of hearing roll back this. Because you know what happens when you roll something back? It's still fucking there. The concept is there.
Right.
We need to identify these fucking vestigial limbs of the executive branch in particular, but in the government overall. And we need to sever them from the body completely. We need to throw them in the fire so not even their ashes will be around for anybody to remember, because they have been a detriment and a cancer to our overall system of governance and our society as a whole.
Yes.
They need to go away, only remembered by the history books in the only context of which is the tyranny that they brought with them.
Yes.
That's what really needs to happen. No more of this roll it back shit. We don't need to roll back anything.
Right.
We don't need to figure out some way to roll back the IRS. Cut it off. It's gone. Yes, this is the way things have been for so long, but we need to sever that body. The ATF, goodbye.
Yeah.
Never to be heard from ever again. There'll be some people sitting around cashing in whatever pension they had saved up at the time. You don't get a full ride. No.
Right.
You belong to a body that didn't need to exist anymore. I'm sorry, but so a lot of pain would have to be gone through. But that's what really needs to happen.
Again, given this book time frame, right? So much was exposed to us in 2020 and the years afterwards regarding the lengths that the federal government and the state governments are willing to go to control the populace, and the types of controls that we saw were largely informational. No one was forced to get a vaccine, but many people were coerced, right? It's important for us to remember and contextualize for ourselves exactly how bad it could be using the global experience that we were talking about earlier, right? Ranging from Canada to Australia to China. We saw these things, and in Canada, it was somehow behavioral, but when we started to see the protests and stuff like that, they got into your bank accounts. They were stealing money from you. They were blocking you off. They were cutting you off. People were losing jobs. Some of the stuff that Murray talks about, it relies on force, the force that the government can do. And it's like, I'm talking about that context because the force isn't always from the police. They don't always force you to do things. They coerce you into quitting your job or injecting yourself with something that in 5 years they'll tell you, well, we never approved it and didn't force you to do it. Because that's what they're saying now. Now that it's going through, the government saying, we didn't force anyone to get a vaccine. We don't have the power. I mean, there's congressional hearings now of the Department of Health and Human Services and Department of Education when they're talking about kids, that we don't have the authority to force anyone to get a vaccination. We just made it mandatory. If you wanted to access this particular government program, then you needed to have a vaccine. That's all. That's all we said. We never made you get your children vaccinated. But if they want to go to school because it's federally funded, then they need to get this vaccine. That's the choice that you've given me, right? Yeah. This is not force. This is the lowest level of coercion that we've seen from the government. And this happens on a daily basis. This happens all the time. The epidemic is over, and it's still happening now. They're still coercing you into these things, right? So,
and that's why I call it the need for an intellectual revolution, because they're not forcing people to do things. They discovered they don't have to do that anymore. No, they just need to win the hearts and minds of a particular group of people. And they will do what they're told. They'll do what is asked of them by the government. And without people waking up to what is happening, they just get what they want. They don't need the Gestapo. They have it in everyone that they convinced to be on their side.
Yes.
And that's what the true revolution is. It's a revolution of people that have figured out that they can and want to think for themselves. They want to live the free, embodied life of, that they want liberty.
They want choice.
They want choice. They want to be able to live this way. And as soon as you wake somebody up to that, and they realize that, I don't have to do what these people say because they're lying to me or whatever it is. They're coercing everyone else to go along with it. And more people continue to join our ranks of the intellectual revolution.
Yes.
And that's what I'm fucking here for. But they fight back. And that's what's happening right now. That's why it's on, brother. The revolution is on. It's just not in any way we ever thought was going to happen.
And I think that's a great point for closing on this particular book. The last thing I have is I think the plans of the defense funds is great, like I said, and I think that it will work for a while. But I don't believe the government will back down when it's forced into a corner. In my opinion, the exact arguments that Murray makes in this book that led to the overgrowth of the government is the reason the government won't allow itself to shrink. They're not going to willingly shrink itself down. They're not going to just hack off millions of jobs at a time because the society doesn't like it anymore. Yeah. The perceived legitimacy of the federal government is waning, so we need to lower its size. That's not going to happen. It's not willingly. No.
They have language all the time. They talk about if you're an anti-government, they're going to come crack down on you.
Yes.
And this is. Does a person operate on themselves when they need surgery?
No.
Because you have an immune system and you have a bunch of things all throughout your body that say, this is not what we do. We don't do this to ourselves.
Yeah.
That hurts us. The body of the government has an immune system in multiple ways that fights back against people trying to do surgery on it when it's unhealthy. It's a cancerous tumor that continues to grow, and we need to operate.
I like it. With that, let's talk about the August book, right? It is The Revolutionary Samuel Adams, and it is written by Stacy Schiff. So,
shout out from David McCullough, too.
Yes, a little shout out from David McCullough on the back. So let's talk about the date really quick. It's going to be in one of these here pages, 2022. This is a newbie. You like this. Stacy Schiff. It's a decent-looking lady. Stacy Schiff is the author most recently of The Witches, Salem, 1692. Her previous books included Vera, Miss Vladimir Nabokov, winner of the Pulitzer Prize, Saint Exupery, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, A Great Improvisation, Franklin, France, and the Birth of America, winner of the George Washington Book Prize and the Ambassador Book Award, and Cleopatra, A Life, winner of the Penn Jacqueline Bogard Weld Award for biography. Schiff has received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Center of Scholars and Writers at the New York Public Library. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, she lives in New York City.
What a fucking resume.
We're out here.
Holy crap.
Yeah, holy shit. So, this is going to be a really good book. Let's do page and pace really quick. There's 30 days in August, right? So,
Yeah, because there's 31 in this month.
yep, there we go. Let's go. Ooh, there's a bunch of endnotes. I like that.
Oh, that's
that
a good
means there's just
sign.
more context to like funny stories and
things?
stuff. Yeah, I really like those.
Ooh.
Acknowledgements.
Here we go.
Okay, the revolution, the very last page is 327. That's not bad. 327 over 30 days.
10.9.
Dude, not bad at all.
Money
10.9. Yeah.
Right on pace.
Yeah, 11 is good. So this will be a very good book. I'm very excited. I'm pretty sure that I got it for Christmas. My big thing for this year was revolutionary books. I was trying to be worried more on the side. Next year is looking like Civil War, unless shit pops off in Europe. Then it's going to be some Eastern European history. So
That'll be exciting.
it's going to suck.
I can't wait to try to hear all the names that you try to pronounce.
Oh, God.
Oh, so much Google Translate involved.
I might get really good at it. Let's see. All
You
right.
might be.
Let's pick a random reading. Stop. Okay. This is page 280. All right. The matter of voting settled, Cushing moved that Congress opened their deliberations with a prayer. New York and South Carolina objected. Their ranks included Episcopalians and Quakers, Baptists and Presbyterians. How could they conceivably worship together? It was the larger question writ small, how to reconcile the diversity of convictions. On September 6th, Adams rose for his first congressional speech. Personally, he had no trouble with, quote, a prayer from a gentleman of piety and virtue who was at the same time a friend to this country. Though new to Philadelphia, Adams had heard the Episcopalian minister Jacob Duché fit the bill. Was there really so great a difference in their faiths? He knew he had a reputation to discard. He knew an Episcopalian would please his Virginian associates. He suspected it would also please the New Yorkers. The motion passed easily. An invitation went to Reverend Duché. At least one colleague that evening applauded Adams' masterly stroke of policy. Early the same afternoon, a messenger rode into Philadelphia with a terrifying express. British ships had bombarded Boston. The soldiers in the town had exchanged fire. 6 men lay dead. Resentment exploded into fury. There were shouts of war and cries of revenge. So great was the chaos that Congress adjourned until evening. Philadelphia's bells rang all day, as they would the next. The miserable Massachusetts delegation dreaded the arrival of every mail, terrified as much for their families as what New England intemperance might mean for the common cause. Had the colony acted in its self-defense, or had it overstepped? In a panic, John wrote Abigail that he hoped she would offer asylum to Betsy Adams and to Deborah Cushing. It was a torturous night.
Bro.
This is going to be a good book.
You're in for a treat.
This is going to be a good
That's
book.
wild.
Yes. So obviously it has to do with Samuel Adams during the Revolution. We can read kind of this entry part here and get a good idea of what we're in for. Thomas Jefferson asserted that if there was any leader of the Revolution, Samuel Adams was the man. John Adams thought his cousin was the most sagacious politician of all. Will you look up the word?
Sagacious?
Sagacious. S-A-G. Yeah, it's a big one. S-A-G-A-C-I-O-U-S.
Having or showing keen mental discernment and good judgment or shrewd.
God damn.
That's the word of the month. We got
Oh, hell yeah.
sagacious.
Okay. John Adams thought his cousin the most sagacious politician of all. With high-minded ideals and bare-knuckle tactics, Adams led what could be called the greatest campaign of civil resistance in American history. Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer Stacy Schiff returns Adams to his seat of glory, introducing us to the shrewd, eloquent, and intensely disciplined man who supplied the moral backbone of the American Revolution. A singular figure at a singular moment, Adams packaged and amplified the Boston Massacre. He helped to mastermind the Boston Tea Party. He employed every tool in an innovative arsenal to rally a town, a colony, and eventually a band of colonies behind him, creating the cause that created a country. Shit. For his efforts, he became the most wanted man in America. When Paul Revere rode to Lexington in 1775, it was to warn Samuel Adams that he was about to be arrested for treason. In the Revolutionary, Stacy Schiff brings her masterful skills to Adams' improbable life, illuminating his transformation from aimless son of a well-off family to tireless, beguiling radical who mobilized the colonies. Arresting, original, and deliriously dramatic, this is a long overdue chapter in the history of our nation. Holy
Let's
shit!
go, dude.
Let's go. This book is going to be great.
Dude, did you notice too, like, because he had mentioned how his cousin was super sagacious.
Yes.
Right? And then later on, she was
Shrewd.
like, she summed it up by saying shrewd.
Dude.
Yo, what a baller
Let's
this dude
go.
sounds like. I'm into it. Fuck, man.
Yes.
The brother makes good beer. Let's go.
So I read that big ass John Adams book, like 2 years ago, and so Samuel Adams was in there, but it was a biography, so it was mostly about John Adams. So
Yeah, John Adams sounds kind of a bitch compared to his cousin.
yeah, he did. He was
Not even sagacious.
John Adams. I respected a ton. Had the writings were incredible, especially just the musings on government and the early nation, the founding, were incredible. Some of those writings, especially the writings were incredible. A lot of questionable shit, right? A lot of questionable stuff. Big statists, really into the government.
Yeah.
Liked a small government, but super into the government.
Yeah.
So not totally into that. But he also, he was trying to violate the First Amendment, like, as soon as he was in office. Like, there was a lot of questionable shit that happened. He's like, we need to be calling the president, His Majesty, and like all this heavy stuff. But specifically, I can attest for the beauty of John Adams's writing. Incredible. Some of the quotations and stuff that I pulled out of there when I was reading it and read on the show were
Patriot boners.
I mean, beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. So that I can't recommend enough. Partially, obviously, due to David McCullough because he's the tits, but it is what it is. So with that, I believe that
He
we will.
sounds like such a G. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I'm excited. I'm very
dope.
excited. Yeah. With that, we will call this review preview to an end. I want to thank everybody, obviously, for joining us here. Salt of the Streets. My name is Donavan.
I'm Colin.
I've been joined by Colin, the co-host. You can find me at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donovan on Instagram. Colin is at Big Bird Alfie on both those things. All this at saltofthestreets.com. Of course, you watch us on our YouTube. Like this, share this, tell all your friends about it, subscribe. Patreon, Salt of the Streets, because this video, just like the show, executively produced by Zeke. If you
right.
want to also executive produce, go there. Top tier. We're out here. It's ballin'. With that, I'll see you guys in a month. Keep booking it up. Goodbye, everyone.
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at